A billionaire invited a black woman to his wedding, then whispered, "Don't let me marry her." What she did next turned a perfect ceremony into a silent rebellion. Stay, this is the wedding they tried to hide. Camille Hart stepped through the side entrance of Roseworth Hall, the VIP guest passage, flanked by velvet ropes and a golden wedding backdrop gleaming under camera flashes. Guests queued up in sleek tuxedos and gowns to pose in front of the ornate signage, the Union of Power, Elias Vance and Serafina Langford. No one acknowledged her. A woman in a headset and sequined blazer pinned a small label to Camille's silk dress guest, 197 Camille Hart. That was it, no welcome, no questions. Just a number among power. Her heels clicked softly against the rose-veined marble floor as she stepped into the grand atrium. The vaulted ceilings loomed high above, painted with European frescoes of winged angels and crowned lions. Cascading chandeliers spilled crystal light like waterfalls down to the lacquered stone, while soft notes of clair de lune drifted from a live string quartet on the mezzanine. White orchids adorned every aisle, trellis and pillar, a symbol of purity. But to Camille, nothing here felt pure. Her jade silk dress, hand-tailored from a second-hand shop, hugged her modestly. It felt like truth, walking in a hall built on performance. She scanned the crowd. Bankers, politicians, fund managers. Conversations floated around her like smoke whispers of tax havens, luxury mergers, PR tactics for surviving media storms. A silver-haired woman eyed her up and down and muttered to her husband, "She doesn't look like she's with the bride's side." Camille caught the glance of a streaming videographer. His camera panned across her, then swept away as if she didn't belong in the frame. And maybe she didn't. Near the altar, Elias Vance adjusted his French cuffs. Billionaire. Groom. Public darling. He smiled at a photographer with the precision of a politician, an expression that never touched his eyes. But then his gaze landed on Camille. In a split second, something shifted. His entire posture changed. Elias broke from his groomsmen, ignoring a bridesmaid calling after him. He walked straight toward Camille. Every guest seemed to part for him as he passed like he carried gravity. Camille barely had time to brace herself before he reached her. No smile. No hello. Just the intensity of someone walking the edge. He leaned in close enough that only she could hear. "Don't let me marry her." The words were soft. But in Camille's ears, they hit like thunder inside a cathedral. She blinked, stunned. Elias didn't wait for her to react. He turned and strode back toward the altar, blending once more into the orchestration of elegance and expectation. No one else seemed to notice. But Camille stood frozen, her pulse roaring in her ears. Weeks ago, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor of her studio apartment, eating instant noodles when a parcel arrived from New York. She almost ignored it, no return address. Inside a thick ivory envelope sealed with wax. Her name handwritten in rich brown ink, Camille Hart. She opened it with trembling fingers. A wedding invitation. Elias Vance and Serafina Langford. Napa Valley. Roseworth Hall. Her first instinct was disbelief. Elias, the billionaire philanthropist, they'd only met once 8 months ago at a charity gala in Brooklyn. That night flooded back. Camille had been the event coordinator racing between backstage setups and irate assistants demanding Hermes napkins for VIP lounges. Elias had arrived early. No entourage. No arrogance. Just a clean-cut man in a navy suit who walked straight to her and asked who planned all this. When they pointed to Camille, he'd smiled. "I want to meet her." They didn't talk numbers. He asked about the theme in their shoes. She explained it came from her mother's life working as a maid for 30 years and how Camille had worn her employer's hand-me-down shoes just to finish high school. Elias had gone quiet, thoughtful. Then, as the jazz band played a quiet swing, he'd offered his hand. "Not for protocol. I just want to dance with someone who isn't pretending." She had danced with him barefoot in the corner, away from the lights. At one point, he whispered, "My mother always said they'll praise your charity, but fear your honesty." It had felt human, grounded, real. And then he'd disappeared. Until now. Camille had debated for hours last night whether to come. The invitation felt like a joke. A test. A string pulled for someone else's amusement. She almost stayed home. But something in her chest said unfinished. At the estate gates this afternoon, the guards had stopped her. Her name wasn't on the digital registry. They exchanged murmurs, radioed someone higher. A man in a tuxedo arrived and simply said, "Mr. Vance confirmed her. Escort her in." Now walking through the marble threshold, Camille didn't feel like a guest. She felt like a pawn walking into a game she didn't understand. On the stage, Serafina Langford stood beside Elias. Her hand rested against his back, not tenderly, but possessively. She scanned the room and met Camille's eyes, then looked away without flinching. Camille's breath caught. The music played on. The lights shimmered. She felt cold. Not from the air, but from something inevitable closing in. I shouldn't have come, she thought. But if I hadn't, who would have heard that whisper? Camille was led to table 17 by a silent usher in all black, who didn't smile, didn't speak, just gestured with a white-gloved hand, and disappeared as soon as she sat down. The table sat awkwardly close to one of the massive speakers, pulsing soft classical music like a heartbeat. Unlike the other tables, dressed in white orchids and crystal, table 17 held a cheap floral arrangement, plastic lilies dyed an unnatural blue. Seated with her were a frail, elderly man with a Langford family pin and a woman in dark glasses who didn't remove her coat indoors. Camille nodded politely, receiving tight-lipped acknowledgments in return. Moments later, a young girl leaned toward her neighbor and whispered just loud enough, "She's not family." Probably an ex-staffer. Eyes flicked toward Camille and then quickly away. A server arrived with a tray of champagne, paused at Camille's elbow, and whispered without expression, "Good luck," then vanished. Camille felt the sting of every glance, every forced smile. She turned her attention to the bride-to-be. Serafina Langford stood near the photographers, flanked by her bridesmaids, her posture calculating like a queen posing for a coin. But Camille noticed something more: tiny signals, subtle glances, the twitch of a finger, a tilt of the chin. And each time someone responded. A lighting technician adjusted the spotlight. A sound engineer tweaked the audio. A cameraman pivoted his lens. This wasn't a wedding. It was a choreographed production. When a young server accidentally spilled wine on a guest's dress, Serafina didn't flinch. She simply turned her head half an inch and whispered something to her manager. Within 30 seconds, the server was gone, vanished, as though erased. Then Elias walked by. Camille instinctively shifted in her seat, uncertain whether to stand. But Elias paused. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and in a voice only she could hear said, "You're the only real thing in this place." Then continued walking as if he hadn't said anything at all. Everyone at the table fell silent. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then the murmurs started. Someone snapped a photo. The woman in sunglasses typed something furiously into her phone. Camille sat frozen, the weight of Elias's words anchoring her in place. Across the room, Serafina smiled for the cameras. But her eyes never left Camille. It wasn't jealousy, Camille had seen that before. This was control. Surveillance. Like a hawk monitoring a breach in the sky. Camille stood and made her way to the restroom, hoping for a breath of quiet. But halfway down the hallway, one of Serafina's bridesmaids intercepted her. "Miss Langford wants to make sure there are no unscripted interactions tonight," she said with a tight smile, her voice sugary but her stance firm. "Especially not during the ceremony." Camille returned the smile thinly and nodded. Her heart pounded. Now she knew every move was tracked. Every breath she took was under the gaze of someone else's agenda. The ceremony began. The hall dimmed. Soft string music rose like smoke, haunting and ethereal. From the ceiling, petals drifted down like snowfall, perfectly timed, impossibly uniform. The announcer's voice rolled over the crowd like velvet. "Tonight, we witness the union of 2 noble bloodlines, where legacy meets legacy and power multiplied." Then came Serafina. Draped in a white mermaid gown that clung to her like armor, she walked the aisle alone, chin-high veil shimmering. The guests collectively exhaled in awe. The spotlight kissed her from both sides, every movement a viral moment waiting to happen. Camille watched her pulse, drumming beneath her skin. Elias stood at the altar, still statuesque, but his eyes weren't on Serafina. They scanned the crowd like a drowning man searching for a lifeline. When they found Camille, they didn't blink. The officiant prompted the vows. Elias opened his mouth, paused. His voice cracked. Vow to Serafina's smile tightened. She didn't turn, didn't flinch, but Camille saw the subtle twitch in her temple. Camille gripped the back of her chair. The officiant's voice rang out. If there is anyone who objects to this union, speak now. Camille's lips parted. But before a sound could leave her throat, the woman beside her, one who hadn't spoken all night, reached out and placed a firm hand over Camille's. The grip was silent, commanding. Don't. Then, an explosion of confetti-like gunfire. Cheers erupted. The officiant shouted husband and wife. The crowd leapt to their feet. Camille flinched, the sound splintering through her skull. Elias leaned forward and kissed Serafina. A gentle, practiced kiss. His eyes shut tightly, not from emotion, but from duty. Camille turned her head. Her stomach twisted. In her mind, Elias's voice returned, not as a whisper now, but a scream she couldn't silence. Don't let me marry her. It wasn't just a plea anymore. It was a fire catching in her ribs, a panic that refused to die. She felt her chest tighten, as if someone had locked a secret inside her, and she was the only one who could still hear it echo. Camille stepped into the marble courtyard behind Roseworth Hall, like she was crossing a threshold into another world. The music from the reception still echoed faintly, string instruments gliding in and out of laughter in crystal toasts. But here, the silence was heavy, reverent, electric. Marble busts gazed down with lifeless poise, as if judging everyone who'd ever tried to escape. A small moonlit pond shimmered with pale light, disturbed only by the occasional ripple from a falling leaf. And on a stone bench, beneath a glass lantern glowing like a relic from a forgotten century, sat Elias Vance. He looked like a man freshly carved out of grief, tuxedo jacket, gone white shirt, slightly unbuttoned sleeves, rolled up high, his hands limp between his knees. His face was ghostly pale, and his eyes, sunken rimmed with sleeplessness, looked like they'd just returned from a funeral, not a wedding. Camille hesitated. Her heels scraped the gravel, and Elias slowly turned. Don't, he said softly. Don't go. I've been waiting for you all night. His voice was quieter now, less polished, less guarded, like the last breath of someone about to give something up. Camille said nothing, but she stayed. Elias exhaled slowly and looked down at the ground. You know the legal wedding is tomorrow morning, right? The ceremony. Tonight was just smoke. A show for the cameras, a performance to keep the press quiet. The real trap closes at 9 a.m. Tomorrow, the contracts become permanent, marital, financial, political. There's no way out after that. He looked up at her, the weight of it all settling between them like fog. Camille frowned, eyes narrowing. Then why tell me why tonight? Elias gave a brittle smile. Langford Capital has a memo. Internal. It documents financial fraud by my CFO. They're holding it over my head. If I walk away from marrying Serafina, they'll leak it. Vanstech will lose its IPO. Not just me, thousands of employees, investors, pension funds. Everyone goes down. His voice cracked on the last words. It's blackmail. And it works. Camille took a careful step closer. And I'm supposed to do what exactly? Feel sorry for the billionaire prince in a cage made of gold. Her tone was sharp, but her eyes were searching. You think, because I'm not one of you, because I wore a rented dress and sat at the fake flower table, I'm automatically the honest one, your magical escape hatch. Elias looked at her, really looked. No, he said, I think you're the only person who's ever looked me in the eye without needing something from me. You don't orbit power. You challenge it? He reached into the inner lining of his vest and pulled out a thick envelope sealed in crimson wax and stamped confidential. Inside, he revealed a set of documents, emails between Langford's board members, screenshots of blackmail clauses, and a blurry voice recording transcript from a meeting between lawyers. I've carried this all day, he said. Not because I thought I'd use it, but because I knew if I didn't show it to someone real, I'd start to believe I was hallucinating the whole thing. Camille stared at the pages, then at him. You brought this to your own wedding? She asked, disbelieving. Elias gave a hollow chuckle. I didn't come here to exchange vows. I came to escape before the chains locked. But I needed someone to witness it to prove I wasn't insane. From his pocket, he pulled a titanium card heavy and dark as slate. He handed it to her. Only if you believe, he said. On the back was a printed QR code. Camille recognized the formatting, an encrypted offshore account login, and a link to a private charter flight. The plane is at Middleton Airstrip, he said. Small airport, no press. One chance. Camille took the card, her hands shaking slightly. You're running, she said flatly. From your company, your life, your wife to be. You're just running. Elias didn't flinch. No, I'm choosing to live. For the first time, I don't need a getaway driver. I need someone who doesn't think I'm crazy for seeing the whole system for what it is. Just one person who believes I'm not the villain in my own story. He reached out, not pleading, just open waiting. It was the most unguarded gesture he'd made all night. His hand trembled slightly and the lantern light. Camille stared at it, then at the card. The words, "only if you believe," seemed to pulse with something more than ink. Her breath caught. This wasn't about money or betrayal. This was a man clawing at the edge of a life he never chose, offering the one thing he had left: truth. She didn't take his hand. Not yet. Instead, she backed away, still holding the card. Her voice was low but firm. You don't need me to believe you. You need to believe yourself. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Behind her, she could feel his eyes tracking her every step, not out of desperation, but out of hope. And though she didn't look back, her fingers wrapped tighter around the titanium card like it was the only real thing left in a night built entirely on illusion. If this story hit you, tap like, then subscribe. Camille closed the door of the auxiliary banquet room behind her and leaned against it, the dim light flickering overhead, casting restless shadows on her face. Her fingers trembled as she dug into her bag, pulling out her phone and video calling the only person who could talk her off the ledge, Tanya. The screen lit up with Tanya's startled face. You're calling me now? What's wrong? Are you still at the wedding? I need to know if I'm insane, Camille whispered. Then, with a breath that cracked halfway, she told her everything about the file, the threat, the whispered plea. By the time she finished, Tanya's eyes were blazing. Langford is political mafia, Camille. If Elias gets exposed, you won't be the whistleblower. They'll paint you as the saboteur who wrecked a national marriage and destabilized financial markets. Serafina will be seen as the poor, betrayed bride. You'll be the black outsider who lit the match. Camille's lips pressed into a bloodless line. Tanya's voice cracked. They've got PR teams that can erase your name from sympathy in a single headline. The call ended in silence. Camille stood alone, phone still in hand, glass of water untouched. Then she straightened her shoulders and stepped outside. The night had grown colder. The wind sliced across her exposed skin, sharper now, as if the air itself were warning her. Decorative string lights overhead shivered in the breeze, their soft flicker no longer festive but anxious. To the west, in the service courtyard, she spotted Elias walking fast, flanked by two men in tuxedos. They looked like security, but their eyes didn't leave him, not protectively but suspiciously. Camille recognized that look. They were guards, not allies. Inside the gallery hall, Serafina was laughing, pouring rare wine into the glasses of two European investors. Her smile was rehearsed, radiant, flawless. The posture of someone who owned the room. A sudden motion broke the rhythm. Serafina gave a subtle nod to a nearby assistant. Seconds later, a woman in a satin dress approached Camille with velvet in her tone. Mrs. Hart, Miss Langford, would like a moment with you on the balcony. Just a quiet word. Camille hesitated, then followed. Out on the marble balcony, the wind cut sharper. Serafina was waiting, cradling two glasses of wine. She handed one to Camille. H. Latour, 1961, she said with a smooth smile. Reserved for significant farewells. Camille didn't sip. Are we toasting to something? Serafina's expression didn't change, but her words turned surgical. You know, not everyone here is invited. Some are placed to watch and stay silent. Camille said nothing. I don't like when outsiders drift too deep into scripts, not meant for them. Serafina took a deliberate sip. So I'll ask plainly, are you a spectator or are you auditioning? Camille's tone was steady. Am I a witness or a pawn? Serafina tilted her head with a kind of smile that came with practiced cruelty. That depends on the role you choose. Then she turned her heels, clicking back into the ballroom. Camille was left with the bitter aroma of vintage wine and the distinct chill of a veiled threat. From the shadows, just beyond the balcony, Elias emerged. His tie was gone. His eyes wild. They've activated internal surveillance, he hissed. "They're tracking my credit card, the cameras, even microphones, sewn into my cufflink." Camille's heart pounded. "Are you wired right now?" "I was. But I changed suits after we talked. This one's clean." "How much time do you have?" 12 minutes. That's how long before airport security swaps shifts at the charter gate. After that, the new crew comes in with Langford clearance. Camille scanned the edges of the property. Her voice was low but firm. "Then you need to disappear. Now. I'll create the distraction." Their eyes met. Not as co-conspirators. As two people standing at the edge of a machine, neither of them built, but both were now defying. Camille turned and walked briskly back inside. Her breath trembled in her throat, but her stride was sharp, decisive. She passed through the corridor and re-entered the private prep room where Elias had left his vest earlier. She opened her purse, pulled out the wedding invitation he'd sent her, and flipped it over. With a black fountain pen, she always carried a habit from her old job. She wrote 3 words: "Let him fly." She folded the card and slid it into the inside pocket of the vest, hanging in the wardrobe, a quiet signal in a war of whispers. Then she approached the mirror. Her reflection looked different now, more composed, somehow older. She pulled out a lipstick, deep red, the color of blood and decisions. It wasn't for beauty. It was armor. Her hand trembled as she applied it. She wasn't shaking from fear. She was igniting something. Behind her, the hallway buzzed faintly with the noise of a wedding slowly winding toward climax. A celebration built on illusion. A cage wrapped in white. Camille leaned in closer to the mirror, searching her own eyes. And then, in a breath not louder than her resolve, she whispered to break a chessboard. "Sometimes you have to walk onto it without leaving a name." Camille stood at the corridor entrance to the grand ballroom, a borrowed mic clipped discreetly to her ear, a champagne flute cradled in one hand, her eyes tracking every movement inside the hall, like a strategist before a heist. The hum of anticipation filled the room as the string quartet shifted into Canaan in D. Guests began whispering excitedly, all eyes drawn toward the couple approaching the wedding cake, Serafina, radiant in couture white, Elias expressionless, in tailored grief. Camille inhaled once deeply, then stepped forward into the eye of the storm. She collided deliberately into a server carrying a tray of champagne. The silver tray crashed to the floor, flutes shattering like falling stars. A stream of golden liquid spilled across the polished floor and onto the exposed control cables of the nearby sound system. A short crackled. Then a sharp pop. Then chaos. An ear-piercing screech of feedback tore through the speakers, making half the guests recoil in alarm. Camille shouted just loud enough, just convincingly enough. Someone collapsed in the center aisle. "Get medical staff." Now she waved her arms frantically, bumping into startled guests, sending others in confused directions, feeding the illusion of emergency. Wedding planners began yelling into earpieces. The MC froze mid-sentence. The DJ cursed under his breath as he scrambled to salvage the soaked mixer. For 30 seconds, order disintegrated. And that was all they needed. In a quiet wing of the hall, Elias moved. Dressed now, in a black hoodie and gloves, he emerged from the service corridor with a backpack strapped tight inside documents, passports, a backup USB drive containing the evidence Camille had seen. He walked swiftly to the service exit, flashing a special access badge Camille had hidden inside his invitation envelope earlier that evening. The door beeped open. A loading dock appeared quiet, dimly lit, where catering trucks idled with doors ajar. Back inside, Serafina, mid-conversation with a Southeast Asian dignitary, narrowed her eyes. She scanned the room. No Camille. No Elias. Her smile remained, but her jaw tensed. Without missing a beat, she leaned toward the head of her security team and whispered, "Check all cameras. Find both of them." Now. Camille reappeared just in time, kneeling beside a woman who had spilled wine on her dress, feigning concern. She stood and positioned herself directly between Serafina and the hallway leading to the restricted access zone. Serafina's eyes found her instantly. "I need a moment," Camille said, voice calm pointed. "About the Langford Political Fund's foreign donations last year." Serafina's smile cracked like porcelain. "Now is hardly the time." "That's exactly why it is, Camille," said, chin raised. A battle of silence. Serafina blinked once, signaling her guards to prepare. But Camille didn't move. For 40 unbearable seconds, she held the line, her very presence an act of obstruction. Behind them, Elias drove the catering truck down a narrow path along the estate's perimeter, using an outdated security passcode Camille had uncovered during her earlier reconnaissance of the hall. One guard shifted. Serafina's mask dropped. She slapped Camille hard across the face. The sound echoed. Guests nearby turned, gasping. "You have no idea what you're meddling with," Serafina hissed. Camille didn't flinch. Her voice remained steady. "You can keep your money, but you don't own the way people look at you." It landed like a curse. Serafina's composure snapped. She turned on her heel and stormed off, barking into her phone. At that precise moment, Elias veered onto the main road 8 miles from the private airstrip, where a charter jet was being readied. At the airport, he presented his credentials and boarding pass. The clerk, half bored, flipped through his documents, then paused. Nestled in the inner fold of his passport holder was a small ivory card. She opened it. Handwritten in soft ink, "Let him fly." The clerk looked up. Their eyes met. Elias nodded, lips trembling slightly, jaw clenched to hold back everything. Back at the estate, Camille stepped into a waiting cab, hair still tousled from the altercation, adrenaline pulsing like thunder in her ears. "You sure about this, ma'am?" the driver asked. "More sure than I've ever been," she replied. The ride to the airport blurred past vineyards and winding roads. As she arrived, security protocols were already tightening. Red lanyard guards paced briskly. Camille slipped through the side gate, scanning the tarmac until she saw the jet. The door was still open. Elias was inside. He turned, saw her. No smiles. No dramatic gestures. Just a mutual understanding. Behind them, in the distance, flashing red and blue lights cut through the fog. A Langford motorcade. Seconds mattered now. The door sealed shut. Engines roared. They rose. Slowly, then swiftly. Upward, away from the concrete and glass and cameras and legacy. Elias looked at Camille. She looked out the window. No more words were needed. They weren't escaping. They were choosing not to be caught anymore. And neither intended to return. 6 months later, mornings in Lagos de Serra carried the scent of roasted coffee and sea salt. Camille no longer woke to alarms or calendars, but to the natural rhythm of waves crashing against stone cliffs just beyond her small whitewashed balcony. Her apartment was simple, uneven wooden shelves, lined with books, a typewriter that jammed every third page, and a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and ink. She didn't need more. She worked at a seaside bookshop called The Real Ones, where no one asked what she did for a living, only what she was currently reading. She managed a section called Rebirth, showcasing works by former CEOs, attorneys, political aids, people who once shaped policy or profit margins, now shaping pottery, poetry, and memoirs of truths they'd once hidden from themselves. Every title carried a quiet defiance. One afternoon, while shelving a new collection of poems written by a retired Wall Street litigator, Camille paused, fingers trailing the spine. The poet had inscribed it, "You don't find freedom, you choose it every day." Elias Vance lived far from her now in a secluded villa near Zurich. He kept a low profile. Every morning, he watered the same row of lavender-played piano, with the kind of slowness only granted to those who no longer needed to prove anything. He led the Second Flight Foundation, a nonprofit helping people trapped in life contracts, forced marriages, rigid inheritance laws, gender constraints, financial control. He no longer gave press interviews. He let the impact speak instead. They didn't speak often. Just once a month, on the 17th, the day their wedding was supposed to happen, they had a 20-minute video call. They never spoke of the past. Never asked, "How are you doing now?" Instead, they shared book stories of strangers they'd helped, and sometimes just silence. The kind of silence that only existed between people who had walked through fire together and emerged not as lovers, not as enemies, but as witnesses to each other's becoming. On a Wednesday morning, Camille reviewed a grant application flagged by the bookstore's community fund. The sender was an assistant VP at Langford Capital, requesting urgent support for a junior analyst seeking to resign from an arranged marriage tied to a merger. Camille stared at the name. Her eyes didn't flinch. She clicked approve and shut her laptop. She stepped onto the narrow balcony. A pair of sparrows beat their wings above the tiled roof, lifting into a pale morning sky, slowly dissolving the remnants of a gray storm. A warm breeze brushed her cheeks like a whisper from something older than memory. The motif returned, not as a memory, but as truth. Freedom isn't noisy, it just arrives. Camille picked up her worn leather notebook and wrote on the back page in her deliberate looping hand, "I didn't save a billionaire. I saved a woman who forgot she could fly." Later that afternoon, a tourist wandered into the Real Ones, flipping through a memoir in the rebirth section. He paused, watching Camille rearrange a display of hand-bound journals. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, not rudely, just curiously. Camille looked up, her gaze steady, but not guarded. She smiled small, serene. "I don't remember what it felt like to be controlled," she said. As the day ended, Camille locked the bookstore and stepped outside. The hill sloped down to a sea, so wide it looked like it had no edge. She walked up to the ridge where the wild grass met the cliff and stopped. Wind pulled at her dress, at her hair, but she didn't shield herself. She let it come. She inhaled deep, filling her lungs with salt and sky. Then slowly, she tilted her head back, closed her eyes, and whispered, not to the wind, not to anyone, but to herself, "This time, the sky isn't scary. It's mine." And in that moment, there were no fireworks, no applause, no headlines. Just a woman who had once been invited to a billionaire's wedding, only to choose her own liberation instead, and in doing so claimed something far rarer than wealth. She claimed herself. Sometimes it takes a black woman calm, unshaken, to walk into a billionaire's wedding here. Don't let me marry her, and turn that whisper into an escape. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a reckoning. If this story moved, you tap subscribe, don't let it fade. And if you were the one invited to his wedding hearing that plea, what would you have done? Thanks for watching. See you in the next story, where truth rises and silence ends.